All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Quill and Hammer Reforging Fiction. I'm Trevor.
And I'm Zach, and today we're going to be reforging Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Trev, get us started.
Yes, well, in honor of that, as you can see, Zach did the most important thing that they should have done in the movie, and he cut his hair.
I cut my hair. I feel like half of my identity is gone, but it's for the best. And I
It
think we can all agree that the hair got way out of hand.
The hair was way out of hand. That was something that should have been taken care of immediately. They should have cut it back. I think pinnacle Harry Potter hair was, movie three. They should have just kept it there.
To be fair, I don't mind Harry's hair all that much, but it's Fred, George, and Ron that I really have a problem with. It looks bad.
It looks bad. I feel like even Harry's looks too. They all need to be somewhat the same length, you know. In my opinion, I don't
Mm.
think Harry. I think his is too far. But he can get away with it. For some reason, though, like,
Maybe it's the that Ron, Fred, and George, their hair is just pin straight.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But anyway,
But I digress. That was a mistake. They knew it was a mistake because they never did it again. In the
yes,
remaining four movies, they fixed
they
the hair.
never did it again.
But let's start off with what did you like about the movie, Zeke? What is I don't know what worked in Goblet of Fire?
Well, I mean, I feel like I say this on every episode, but these filmmakers know how to do action. And as far as the action sequences go, regardless of how faithful or not faithful they are to the events in the book, they're entertaining action scenes, you know. You have, and I'll bring up the dragon scene later, but in terms of praising the dragon scene where Harry's flying around the school, when he's sliding down the roof of Hogwarts and barely gets back onto his broom and slips away, all that kind of stuff. It's exciting. You know what I mean? It's an interesting spectacle, but there are a lot more things that I have problems with than things that I can praise for this film. I think out of the four now that we've done, this is the film that I have the most qualms with.
All right, well let's jump into those qualms, Zeke. What's your first one? Where do we start?
The very first thing that I have a problem with is not expanding the Quidditch World Cup. And there's a very important reason why. So, if you remember, in fact, there are many plot points that are set up during the Quidditch World Cup sequence that they've taken out, and now the plot is thinner for it. Things don't make quite as much sense, and then they end up having to expand the dragon first task sequence. Now, let me explain. First, let's go over the dragon first task sequence.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
In the book, oh now I can't remember the name of the feint that Crumb does, but Harry is imitating the Wronski feint. Is that
Yeah,
what it's called?
I think so,
He
yeah.
imitates he imitates the Wronski feint to get the egg, and that shows his skill with the broom, right? He
Right.
wouldn't have known about that except for Crumb does it in the Quidditch World Cup final. You need to have that in there. You need to have that light flick on in Harry's mind and get him excited again about being a seeker. And that would make a whole lot more room for other. events in the book to be expanded upon because you don't have this 15-minute first task sequence, right?
Right.
You show Harry doing the Ronsky feint. You can even show him practicing outside, on the in the Hogwarts grounds beforehand or whatever, but have him execute it like he does in the book, and it's over. It's fine. Everybody's super impressed, right? Crumb's super impressed. All of that. So
Right.
that's my first one. That may be a small nitpick, although I do think it has big repercussions going forward in the film, but that's my first one. The second one is the Barty Crouch arc.
Yeah.
They super pared it down. In the book, Barty Crouch Jr. is convicted as a Death Eater at the age of like 18 years old by his father. And in the film, you see him, he's an older man, and he's defiant and proud, and he's, lunging toward his father, basically insinuating that he hates his father, that sort of stuff in the apprehension scene. But in the book, he is an 18-year-old boy sobbing, pleading with his dad to not send him to Azkaban. It's pretty harrowing, especially if you listen to the audiobook and you have the narrator really putting in some emphasis onto those lines. It's not an easy scene to go through.
Right.
And that sets up more confusion and more doubt. If in the film you have Barty Crouch Jr. being seen in Harry's dreams, you see him at the Quidditch World Cup, which didn't happen in the book, and you kind of know, like, okay, well, where is he? He keeps showing up in these dreams, and everybody knows that Barty Crouch Jr. is going to be end up being the villain somehow, right?
Right.
But in the book, the Quidditch World Cup is how Barty Crouch gets free in the first place. In the book, he is at the Quidditch World Cup accompanied by the house elf Winky under an invisibility cloak and ends up getting free. And there's a whole side arc with Winky and the house elves, which I think would have been more interesting than some of the subplots they chose. But you they eliminated the sense of mystery in regards to who was pulling these strings. Um, and so I think that's a big problem that would need to be fixed. But what are your thoughts about the Barty Crouch Jr. arc?
Well, I agree with you on the Barty Crouch Jr. arc. It needs to be more because if you remember in the book, it doesn't say, you know, Barty Crouch Jr. as his name. His name is Bartemius Crouch,
Right.
just like his father. So you think that Barty Crouch Sr. is sneaking around and you don't even know he exists until the pensieve, right? Until
Right.
until you see, Barty Crouch is dead, Barty Crouch Sr. has died, excuse me, and you have no idea what's going on. And the only reason Harry doesn't know that Barty Crouch is taking over Moody is, imitating Mad Eye Moody is because he drops the egg and he, you know, gets
Right.
caught in one of the things, that's what, threw him off is he saw Barty Crouch, wandering the castle.
Right.
But I agree that you need him there. You need that whole thing expanded because it throws suspicion on Barty Crouch Sr. and
Hmm.
you don't know what his you don't know what his motivations are, but you know that he's not a Death Eater because he hates with a passion the uh whatever they're called, the Death Eaters and whatever. But he's
Right.
you I don't know. I'm trying to articulate how important that is, but it's important because it directly leads to the main plot of this is important. This is why, everything is coming together. It obfuscates what's really going on, and then you finish it all off.
Right.
But
I'm with you.
I don't like how they I don't like how they portrayed Barty Crouch Jr.
Okay,
The
why so?
the like he's almost crazy. He wasn't crazy, he was brilliant. He was a zealot,
Right. He was a zealot, not insane.
not
He was just a
insane.
zealot.
Hmm. And so uh to your point when he said they are what was I trying to say? When Zach, I lost my train of thought.
Well, shoot, Trev. Let's jump topics then,
All
and
right,
if it comes back
let's
to you,
jump
it can
topics.
come back.
We said everything that I can remember on that. Let's jump topics.
So, the next thing that bothers me is, I talked about the first task. And the next thing that bothers me, and we're jumping ahead in the film, and I think that's okay. We'll circle back to other things. But the way they handled the third task really bothers me, even more so than the first task. If I
Hmm.
had one thing that I could change about the film, it would be the third task. In the film, it's set up as this changing giant hedge maze that has some effect on your mind.
Yeah,
And that's basically it. Maybe the vines of the hedge are out to get you, but that's about it. And it's just get to the cup first and let's see how ruthless these teenagers are if they're going to take each other out and blah blah blah, right?
right,
But in the book, it's set with challenges. There are challenges to get through to the center of the maze. There are riddles that Harry has to get through. There are creatures that he has to either bypass or fight or use defense against the dark arts. I even think there was a Bogart somewhere and he had to use his Patronus charm. It's like the whole point of the third task was to see the how do I want to say this? The height of their skills in
right.
every aspect of their magical learning. Defense against the dark arts, care of magical creatures, herbology, everything. That
Yes,
was the point. It wasn't just can you get to the cup in time? And
right,
so I think that's my biggest problem. I would love to have that expanded and see how Harry deals with his obstacles and maybe show how the other champions either do or don't get through their own obstacles. But that's
right.
probably my biggest gripe with the entire film.
It is. It really does bother you when you go back because they are shortchanging Harry. I
100%.
know we all uh at least I feel in the books that like towards the end all Harry does is he can do a Patronus charm and he can do Expelliarmus.
You mean in the films?
I feel like in both.
In both, okay.
Like he knows things, but he relies on Expelliarmus and then he's really good at the Patronus charm. But
Right.
like you don't necessarily see him using other spells, which I think is a shame because there are so many really good, interesting spells that you can use. And to your point, they didn't show any of those. That the maze became, are you able to run fast and not get taken out by one of the other competitors or you know, or the maze itself? But like
Right.
Harry has to bypass a sphinx. At one point, he becomes at one point I think gravity changes himself and he gets has to figure out how to move forward
Hmm.
and he runs into Cedric once who said, I ran into one of the Scroots, which, in the books are these magical creatures that Hagrid may or may not have bred himself, like
Right.
um you have all of these obstacles and and then you don't realize that you've got Moody and McGonagall and Hagrid all around the outside, patrolling,
Right.
and that's how you know that Moody is Moody, which as we know is Crouch. He's manipulating people. He puts the Imperious Curse on Crumb,
Right.
has Crumb take out what's her name, and then try
Sure.
and take out Cedric, and then leave Harry to go and win.
Right.
And so you miss all of that because instead of, Barty Crouch Jr. actually manipulating everything, it's just vague, obscure. You don't know what's going on with Crumb. He's just an idiot, like all of these things.
Right.
And it shortchanges them. I mean, you could see like Fleur is not just some floozy.
Right.
She has actual skills. Um,
But I think that's an important point because you don't see anything about her dragon first task.
mhm.
You all you know in the second task is that she couldn't get past the Grindylows and left her sister, and then she can't do anything in the maze. She fails in the maze too, and it's like it super short changes her.
It does.
And, I understand you need to cut things from the book and make cinematic decisions so that you have time to show the important things. But I think there were some better choices for cut content that they could have utilized and then spent more time on some more important things.
Right. So let me back up for a second and and I wish I'd looked this up before we started. But I wish we knew exactly how much time was spent on each section of the task. Um, and I don't necessarily mind the first task because it's important and and I find it odd, not odd, like hard to show, you know, the action of it. Because really, in the book, Harry's up there, he dodges fire a little bit. He's really just trying to bait the dragon to get up so he can dive down and get
Right,
the egg, right? Aesthetically, cinematography, aesthetics, or whatever, the chase is more action packed than that would have been. But putting that aside, I wish I would have known, looked up how long, how much screen time started, you know, Harry walks into the first task, or even from the start of they're in the tent and they go from the tent to learning about the dragons
right.
and then to the end of the task. Um, but how much time was spent on that? How much time was spent on the second task, how much was spent on the third task, how much was spent on the unexpected task, and I would have liked to, spend more time on the ones that you can actually see, what's going
Right.
on. But anyway, what would you have cut from the books or emphasized more in order to expand the third task or any of the tasks?
So, this may be a controversial opinion, but in terms of showcasing both action and the champion's skills and even relationships, I think the Yule Ball was a complete waste of time. 100%, I think it was a waste of time. The the trouble that Ron and Harry had asking out a date, the scene with McGonagall teaching the Gryffindors how to dance, all that kind of stuff. I think it ate up way too much time and didn't leave enough to give proper respect for the third task.
Okay, so do you cut that out entirely? Because there are certain things that happen during the third or during the Yule Ball that are important in the book. So do you just cut that out entirely? Do you jump all towards the end? What are your thoughts there?
Well, give me your plot points that happen in the book during the Yule Ball that you think are important enough to keep, and I'll give my opinion.
All right, well, the first thing is you have Cedric giving Harry the what's it called? The
The hint.
the hint. But Harry is jealous of Cedric, so he doesn't want to take the hint because he wanted to ask Cho to the ball, but Cedric beat him to it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that is, he kind of hems and haws. I don't really want to go and take a bath and use the prefix bathroom because it was Cedric who gave me the hint. And so he pushes it off to the last minute rather than spend the time necessary on it.
Okay.
So I feel like that happens. I do like the little tiff between Hermione and Ron. Um, the Victor Crumb is using you stuff because that suspicion is kind of important because you don't trust any of these people, but you don't know who to trust. Through the entire movie, you don't know if you can trust Madame Maxine. You don't know if it's Karkaroff who's really behind it. You don't know if Crumb and Karkaroff are in cahoots. You don't know like what's Barty Crouch doing. All of these little tiny things add up towards, you know, um, obfuscating who the real mastermind behind this is. And that is an important thing. I will also say, going back to the Barty Crouch Jr., Barty Crouch Sr. stuff, they left out the important part that they had to subdue and Imperious curse Barty Crouch Sr. Wormtail and Wormtail and Voldemort go and overpower Barty Crouch so that they can free Barty Crouch Jr. And then that entire arc, he starts fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And that's why, in the book, you remember Percy becomes his assistant and becomes the
Right.
judge and comes in. And it's a little odd, but they blame it on, he had to fire Winky. And so he doesn't have his servant to take care of him. And so he's, slowly, he's not as young as he once was and he can't keep doing what he was doing. And so that it just kind of spirals into this what's wrong with Barty Crouch, but you forget that you need him to be under the Imperious Curse to make any of this plausible. Because
Right.
he's the one who knows the rules. He's the one who, if he had said, no, we can't have an under, 17-year-old wizard, we can't have an underage wizard in this tournament, but they had to use him to get in and get Harry in and all of the like so many things happen, but you miss those subtle plot points. If the Yule Ball doesn't happen, then you don't realize, well, why is Percy here? what's happening with Crouch, that kind of stuff.
Okay. So let me give you an answer here. And
Okay.
I'll start by saying in the film, the Yule Ball didn't really do any of those things
It did not.
anyway.
No, no.
You have for Cedric giving Harry the hint, it happens, in a scene afterward, I think. And or maybe before, I can't quite recall. But his delay, and granted, his delay in going seems to be more due to he's feeling depressed because Cho didn't pick him. And so I'll give you that. There is a little bit of that in there that contributes to his procrastination of figuring out the egg. But I think you can show those types of things a lot more succinctly than spending 20 minutes total on the entire Yule Ball scene. And same thing with Hermione and Crumb. I have a vague memory in the book about Hermione and Crumb being down on the beach at one point and talking, and that can be, maybe Ron can see Hermione down there with Crumb, and that can be where their tiff starts. It can you can still bring up these plot points, but you can make them more succinct. You don't need to show the entire 7 chapters of the book to get these things across. Um,
Eh, fair point.
and as far as the Barty Crouch stuff, I think that goes all the way back to the Quidditch World Cup, and they decided to cut it out there, and so they cut it out through the entire process.
Right.
Now, but bringing up Percy, I think you do have a good point in bringing up Percy. I feel like they dropped the ball on the Percy plot point through the entire series. I would have loved to see the Percy plot point where he turns against the family and turns into a simp for the Minister of Magic. But as far as I don't know, it's a hard decision to make. You know, I do think the Yule Ball was way too long. Maybe you can cut it short, but I guess my argument is that if you cut it too short, what's the point of having it in there at all? I would rather just cut it out entirely and figure out a way to put these plot points in elsewhere than to either expand the Yule Ball to get all of these plot points or even try and cut it shorter but still fit things in. I think I still am going to stick to my guns and say you cut it out altogether. But
You
what
know,
would you do? What's your
well,
thought?
well, the the thing that I would do, I mean, in a perfect world, let's start there. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need to cut any of these points out.
Right.
Um, in a perfect world, we could do the 4 hour, Lord of the Rings extended edition thing. And I think we decided for the Harry Potter series that we're not doing that.
We're not going to do that.
So that's that's the crux is you have a 700-page book. How are you going to include the important things? What's important, what's not? I I like the Yule Ball because it separates it adds a little mundanity. I want to say it makes a little bit of mundane or normalcy and reminds you that they're just kids. And
Fair.
and
That's fair.
even though Harry got thrust into this task and he didn't want it, and he didn't want it in the books because he's sick of being famous Harry Potter.
Hmm.
And so he's stuck doing it, and you have the tiff between Ron and Harry, and that's super important. Um, and it just all of this stuff going on. But I like the Yule Ball because it adds a little bit of normalcy. But to your point, absolutely we don't need all of the scenes. Um we don't need McGonagall teaching everyone how to dance. Although I love the idea of uh Alan Rickman as Snape teaching the Slytherins how to dance. That that image in my mind is, you know, because McGonagall's teaching the Gryffindors and they're just, whatever. If you imagine Snape doing the same thing, that would have been worth putting into the movie.
I concur. That would have been hilarious. I can only imagine.
But you cut that out. That saves you 5 minutes. You can cut out, you know, all of the we're asking, you know, who to ask. You can have a little bit of like, okay, there's the ball. Hermione, why don't you go with Hermione, go with me. Ginny, you can go with Harry. You can add that in, and then they
Hmm.
can both say, well, Ginny can't because she's been asked by someone, and
Right.
Hermione can't because she's been asked by someone. And then you can show, 2 or 3 minutes of, you know, like I really liked the scene of Hermione coming down the stairs in her dress and everyone turns and looks and is like, wow. So that's the first time that Hermione is portrayed in the books as beautiful, not just nerdy.
Right.
Um and and so there's that. But you don't need the dance scene, you don't need the you can cut most of that out because it's not important. Harry trying to ask Cho and all of these things back and forth. If we're talking, is that really important to the plot? It's not. Harry's love life isn't really important to the plot. It adds some normalcy to the characters and reminds you that they're kids, and you can still do that without without sacrificing 20 minutes of film space to this more or less pointless plot point. The only thing it does is it reminds you that time is passing, right?
Right. So here's my rebuttal to that. I'll take the stance and I'll keep my stance of I want to get rid of it altogether.
Yeah.
I think the most compelling argument you bring up is showing the normalcy. I would argue that it would be more beneficial to show them in classes rather than the Yule Ball for normalcy. You can show Harry and Ron griping about homework. I'm sure that happens in every single book. I can't remember exactly, but I just know they're procrastinating and they've got the tiff with Hermione and they can't ask for help with their assignments, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But show them in class, show them, trying to figure all that stuff out as a way to show that yeah, they're still just kids, right? And that brings me to another important thing that they left out, and that is when Mad Eye Moody had them practice throwing off the Imperius curse. What do you think about that? Do you think they were smart to cut that, or do you think they should have found a way to add that in?
So I wish they had added it in because it's Harry, like it gives strength and shows how Harry is important, not just because he's the chosen one or whatever, but that he actually has skills. It goes back to Harry is a competent wizard at the age
Right,
of 14. Um, and you don't see any of that. You see, yeah, he can fly a broom. And then in the second task, it's like, okay, yeah, he's he got there first. Instead of just taking Ron and leaving, he made sure everyone was gone. Like that's an important character arc for him. Maybe not an arc, I wouldn't call it an arc, but it's like it just shows that Harry, the kind of person that Harry is.
Right.
And then you go and then you cut out all the action in the maze, and it's like, okay, well, what can Harry do?
Right.
He you to to show normalcy, it's like, okay, yeah, they have the second task and he's working on that, and then they can gather everyone together and say, here, the third task is going to be this maze. There's a scene down there where it's like there's this maze, they're talking. Ludo Bagman, which whether he's in the movie or not, Barty Crouch can be like, all right, we're gonna have a maze. It's gonna be filled with a whole bunch of obstacles and things and whatever, and your job is to prepare as well as you can to make it through this maze and showcase all of your skills, and it really becomes who the most skilled wizard is,
Right.
and that doesn't take place. But you could, going back to the normalcy, you can show Harry learning these spells and have a little mini montage of, you know, learning how to stun, learning how to, I don't know, there's like the reducto curse. I'm trying to think of spells, and I'm going
Right.
back to Lego Harry Potter and trying to, remember what is it, And so you have all of these things that he's learning, and you miss all of that, and it shows that Harry's not competent, or not competent, but it shows that he's not really as skilled as he is. You don't get that sense of Harry is competent. So to go back and answer your question, yes, they should have showed that in there and shown Moody using that on the students, and just briefly, like, and I imagine it as in the third movie, kind of like the scene where Lupin is explaining the auger,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so they've kind of, it doesn't need to be fast, it's just this kind of, you've got Moody doing all of these things, and then he imperiuses Harry, and Harry's about to do something, and then he shrugs it off.
Right.
And I think if you show that, and you can kind of show that, show a couple of other things that Harry's learning stuff, then it's like, okay, yeah, he's actually a competent wizard. And
Right.
then when you get to the graveyard, Voldemort tries to imperious Harry multiple times, and Harry is able to kick it off.
Right.
And that is significant because he's actually fighting off the Dark Lord in the only way that he can.
Right. I Yeah, I'm with you. Honestly, I'm with you. I like the idea of a montage. I don't know that a classic montage would fit the film style, but there needs to be something. There needs to be some kind of showcase where Harry is learning all these things because you miss it. And I think the biggest downfall overall of the films is not representing Harry's competence and his skill as a whole. I
Right.
think I saw something the other day, and I'd be interested to go and confirm this, but in the first film, Harry doesn't cast a single spell. He does not use magic one time. And I think that kind of not carries over, but it's kind of a foreshadowing of the rest of the film series that all he has is his Patronus and Expelliarmus, and that's it. you know. But anyway, I digress. But
Yeah.
I think showing some of the classes, showing um I don't remember. I'm sure there are no and I do know there are potions classes. There's that scene in the book where they get into a fight during potions class and Hermione's teeth grow extra large and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I think it would have been more beneficial to show normalcy through classes than the Yule Ball.
Right. I It pains me to do so because I like the Yule Ball and I'm more of a like that is a main thing. The classes they happen and little plots and stuff happen here or whatever, but the Yule Ball is it's a main plot in the book. Like there are four
Fair.
or five chapters leading up to it, and then at the Yule Ball, and then the aftermath and all of that. But for the sake of a good movie, I am willing to begrudgingly cede that to you.
Okay.
But
Now, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to bring up another plot point. If
Okay.
you have one in mind, then please share. But I was going to say, what about the Rita Skeeter plot point and Hermione figuring out how she knows all of this inside information and figuring out that she's an unregistered animagus? Would you keep that in? Do you think that has enough merit that they should have put it in the film? Or would you keep that as something you cut from the book?
Well, I'm kind of the opinion that like, don't I want to quote Ron Swanson, but I'm trying not to swear. Don't half a two things, full a one thing, right?
Right. Fair enough.
And I don't even like that they added her in to begin with because she's in there at the weighing of the wand ceremony, and then she shows up once for the rest of the film. So
Right.
if she is constantly around and you show, these articles coming out, because there are articles coming out throughout the film. There's the first one about Harry, um, being the youngest, whatever, and they don't even remember, really mention any of the other tributes.
Right.
Um, Tributes,
Champions.
champions. I don't know why, other than
You
Jade and
must have
I
been
watched,
reading The
yeah,
Hunger
the
Games.
Hunger Games, the newest Hunger Game book came out, and so that's on my mind. But the champions, so they hardly showcase any of the other champions. It becomes a sob story about how Harry's young and interesting or whatever. And
hmm
then you have another one where Rita Skeeter finds out that Hagrid is half giant and slanders him, and then the love story angle between Harry and Crumb, and going back even before then, Rita Skeeter writes something after the debacle at the World Cup
hmm
and misquotes, or not misquotes, but quotes Arthur Weasley saying something, even though Arthur didn't really comment on anything.
Right.
And the debacle at the Ministry. So you've got that, and then these plot points all the way through where she's stirring up contention and discord and all of this stuff. But if you're not, if you're worried about time, you got to cut it all out.
You got to cut something out.
There are more important things than this. And so while I love that plot point and I love the idea of Hermione um, figuring it out and then capturing her,
Right.
like I love that idea. But um, but as far as the movie goes, there are more important things that need to be included and given justice to than that tiny, not tiny arc, but that particular arc. if you wanted to if you wanted to include things, I would have included more of the Barty Crouch Jr., Barty Crouch Sr. stuff all the way leading from there to the end of the movie and weave that in rather than Rita Skeeter.
Yeah, I concur. I do like the arc of Rita Skeeter specifically to show some of showing Hermione being a detective and thinking, using her intellect instead of it just being implied by her spewing off book knowledge. You know what I mean? I think that adds a depth to her ability to reason, her ability to think.
Right,
But but I do agree. As much as I like it, I think it is something you cut out entirely in favor of um, the Barty Crouch Jr. arc and in favor of expanding the third task.
right. I know that this isn't a it's when we started doing the movies, the second task task has always bothered me because it's like, yeah, it's really cool, but what's the point if no one can watch, right?
Fair.
So this is a minor gripe. Before we move on to the final showdown between Voldemort and Harry and him coming back and everything and talking about that and the end of the book. Um, I would have put up like a view screen, a magical something.
Kind of like they did at the World Cup where they showed, like the panels
Mhm.
going across the stadium to show Crumb
Right,
ginormous.
right.
Something like that.
You could have done something like that to um, magically show everyone what's going on because it's boring. It's like, you know, what are you doing? We're watching submarine races.
Right.
Okay, so there's action going on, but like I don't know. So anyway, that's just a gripe. I would have put something up there and it wouldn't have followed the books, but I don't care because it's always bothered me.
Okay. Fair
But
enough.
let's recap just a little bit. We would have put in here and there more Barty Crouch Jr. stuff. We would have shown Barty Crouch Sr. being slowly losing his mind, I guess, is kind of
Mhm.
how it's portrayed in the books. We would have maybe reduced a little bit of the first task, gotten rid of the Yule Ball entirely. Uh, I don't think we would have changed much about the second task because it's
I think it was a good length and it was a good representation of the book. You do see Harry getting there first and worrying about all the other contestants or all the other victims. Um, and I think time has passed. We've taken too much time talking about other things. I think the way that Harry gets the gillyweed should have followed the book more closely, but maybe we can bring that up when we go through the books. So,
right. So let's jump to the end. So we would significantly expand the third task.
hmm.
And I think spending more time on the third task would have been phenomenal. But then we get to the graveyard. What are your thoughts on the graveyard?
I don't have a single complaint about how it was portrayed in the movie. I don't recall how it's portrayed in the book, but for the most part, I think the way that they did it in the movie was excellent. The way that Wormtail comes down carrying Voldemort, he kills Cedric, and then you have that sequence where Voldemort is reborn in the cauldron, all that kind of stuff. It's creepy, it's eerie, it's ominous, and then you see Voldemort open his eyes. Maybe the one thing I would say is if they could have gotten his eyes to be red, like in the book, that would have just been the cherry on top. The way that he does that weird thing with his hands and over his bald head and he opens his eyes and it's like it's you feel the dread, the evil. I think that sequence doesn't need any changing. But I'd love to hear if you have a different opinion.
No, so my main gripes are little nitpicky things. I would have, going back to what we were talking about with Harry being competent, I feel like you need the Imperious Curse cast at least once so that Harry can fight him off just a little bit more,
If
right?
you remember, he does cast the Imperious Curse on Harry to make him bow before their duel, but we're missing the context of Harry having already cast off the Imperious Curse
But
in Mad Eyes.
but I don't think it actually says, I don't think he says Imperio. Voldemort just forces Harry to bow.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
So I would have done that. My other nitpicky things are I I don't like the way that they show apparition.
Okay.
It's like everyone turns into smoke and then comes down and it's like they're traveling by smoke, but it's like that's not how it works. You just disappear and reappear, and the only thing that it's just a little pop, pop. There you go. It's nitpicky, but I don't know how you do it differently, but I wish you would. It was just like, there they are. But the other thing that I am not sure I really like, but I don't know how to fix is when the spells collide, there is a line between the wands, right? And
Mhm.
then you've got like this liquid metal of spells and sparks or whatever coming off of it. It seems to bother me, but I don't know how to fix it. That's just a little tiny nitpicky thing. But the main thing is I think they did a fantastic job with that. I My main complaint comes back to the way that they finished the movie off with Harry coming back and and Mad Eye Moody takes him away, which is great, but then you find out that it's really Crouch or whatever. I want to hear Crouch's story of I am Imperious, I found the wand. I found Harry's wand. I did this, you know, he had to fire Winky. My master came. And, I want more of that. I want to see him more as the zealot in awe, not
Right.
necessarily the crazy whatever. And then,
And
he admits to killing his father and everything that he did to get Harry there, and then him kind of seeing like, and I am gonna be rewarded by the Dark Lord, and like that's what I want. I
right,
wish we could have tied all of that up right there. All of the things that he did to get Harry where he was, to manipulate him, and it worked.
right.
I want that stylistically rather than crazy Barty Crouch Jr.
I concur. I can I think I can overlook it a little bit, but moving past the graveyard and going to the conclusion, like you said, I think another big disservice they did was to Snape's character in the finale of the book. You have Harry in the hospital wing, I think, and I could be wrong. I can't remember exactly, but the point is you have Dumbledore, Snape, and Fudge all right there.
Mhm.
And Fudge is saying, "No, there's no way he can be back. That's not true. It's not happening." and Snape comes forward and he rips his sleeves back and shows the dark mark on his arm, talks about how it burned, how he felt it, and every Death Eater knows what it means. And you have Fudge still shrug it off, he leaves, and then you have the conversation between Dumbledore and Voldemort, where he tells Snape, or sorry, not Dumbledore and Voldemort, Dumbledore and Snape, where he tells Snape that he needs to go to the Dark Lord, and basically telling Snape that this is your time to pay back me saving your life, basically.
Right.
And it sets up Snape being the double agent.
I forgot about that. Not I forgot about that in the context of the movies because you are right. It does do a disservice for Snape because he's going undercover and he's showing and this is something through the entire movie. He's showing that he is loyal in all of these spots, even though he's a dirtbag. He's just a jerk everywhere. But like he is showing that he is loyal throughout the entire film, you know?
Right.
And you miss that because they leave it out, but he has to go back and try and convince Voldemort that he's not a traitor
Right.
and he's this double agent and so you miss that. You miss, the suspicion of, you know, Snape is a member of the Order of the Phoenix, but you don't really trust him. He's a jerk throughout that movie too, and then the next one, and the payoff for the sixth movie where he kills Dumbledore. Spoiler alert. Um, that payoff is so heartbreaking because all of these things come up and you don't know, like it's like all of your suspicions are confirmed. He
Right.
is Voldemort's man, not Dumbledore's. And so you've got this entire, you know, arc of an important character that you miss because you miss the key moment where he is going back to Voldemort on Dumbledore's orders and you don't know if you can trust him.
Mhm.
You're missing that. I forgot about that. That is a fantastic point.
And I mean the whole scene would take 5, maybe 10 minutes, you know.
Right.
And I think it would be worth shortening anything to get that in there because it sets up plausible doubt for Snape both ways. You can doubt that he's a Death Eater, you can doubt that he's a member of the Order of the Phoenix. Either
Right.
way, you have that question in your mind until the very end when you get his memories.
Right.
But so I think again they missed the opportunity to end the film with something that important. But
Right. And I think you end it right there. I don't think you need to see the schools leaving. I don't think you need to see whatever. I think I would cut all of that out and end it with, sending Snape away and then the hospital wing find some way to just end it there in the hospital wing.
yeah,
Um, but that is a great point. So we're about out of time. Let's do a small recap again.
okay.
Uh, we need to expand the World Cup just a little bit,
Hmm.
show that Harry lost his wand, set up the actual scene with Barty Crouch Jr., all of that, Barty Crouch Sr. throughout the film.
And the
You
Ronsky
have
feint. And the Ronsky
and the
feint.
Ronsky feint, absolutely. And then you see, you know, we are fine with the selection process. I guess a nitpicky thing we didn't talk about is the all boy Durmstrang and all girl Beaubaton, whatever. You can look past that. That's minor,
Right.
but a little nitpicky. But then we would change the first task a little bit, even though I like the action sequence of the first task, but get rid of the Yule Ball entirely. We can leave the second task more or less alone, move on and really expand the third task, and then tie up Barty Crouch Jr.'s arc and set up Snape's role for the rest of the books.
Right.
Am I missing anything?
I think that's about it.
All right. Well, I loved this topic, and I'm really mad that I didn't think about certain things like shortening the Yule Ball and remembering Snape. That I'm mad at you for that, Zach.
I remember the important things, Trev. I
I
remember the important things.
I agree, but I think we can all agree that the most important thing, the hair, that should have been changed.
That should have been changed.
Well,
Okay,
we're gonna leave it there. I'm Trevor. This is Zach for Quill and Hammer, Reforging Fiction. Please like and subscribe. If you have movies you want us to review next, leave it in the comments. We'll get to them. Zach, any final words?
not a one.
Not a bit.
Not a bit.
All right. Well, we appreciate all of you listening. We will be back next week talking about the Order of the Phoenix, and we will be back.